Welcome in, Jets fans and Jaguars fans. It's crossover Thursday for Thursday Night Football. Tonight, the Jets take on the Jacksonville Jaguars at what should be a rainy MetLife Stadium. I'm John Butchko, the host of Locked On Jets. Jets fans know me. Joined by Tony Wiggins, the host of Locked On Jaguars. Jaguars fans know him. Tony, we did
Absolutely.
this. We did this about a year ago. It
We
was
did.
around the holiday season. Both teams were having disappointing years. This year, things looking up for the Jaguars. Things were looking up for the Jets, maybe not so much recently. What's the big storyline around the Jacksonville Jaguars right now?
Well, both teams have improved since last year. And speaking of that game, by the way, people thought that was going to be a boring game. That game was extremely entertaining. If you recall how it ended, and Zach Wilson ran for like a 50-yard touchdown, and it was just a whole bunch of wild, crazy stuff going on in that game. So the biggest storyline for Jacksonville is they control their own destiny. They have a clear path to the AFC South Championship. They play the Titans the last game of the season, the Titans who will now be without Ryan Tannehill for the rest of the year. They're a game behind, and they already beat them once. So if they go into that game one game behind, however that happens, like if the Jaguars lose to the Jets, but then the Titans lose to the Cowboys next week, then as long as they're a game behind, that last game will be for the AFC South. So even if they're a game ahead, I think the game will still be for the AFC South because they would have to then win and not lose the tiebreaker advantage to Tennessee. So extremely optimistic. The team has played extremely well. The last 5 weeks, Trevor Lawrence is the second highest rated quarterback in the NFL. So everything now is pointing upward, and everything. The enthusiasm is high. The stadium was packed to the rafters last week against Dallas in a game that they won in thrilling fashion. They've beaten Dallas, Baltimore, the Raiders. They've won 3 out of their last 4 games. So they're riding high a little bit, man, and everything's looking up, and they're sort of looking like the team that no one wants to play. Very similar to what Detroit was last week, the team that you guys lost to barely at the end of the game.
Very similar to what the Jets were just a couple of weeks ago. This was a
Yeah.
Jets team that was a very tough out early in the season. They started 5-2. They started 6-3. They were 7-4. And now the Jets are on a 3-game losing streak, and their season is very much on the line in this Thursday night game. It's kind of tough to believe where we were 3 weeks ago that the Jets could essentially be done for all intents and purposes if they lose this game and fall to 7-8. A very frustrating circumstance for the Jets. And what's amazing is that the Jets got off to a great start this year. Zach Wilson, I know the Jaguars have the guy that was drafted first overall in 2021. Of course, Zach Wilson was drafted second overall that year. I could have seen a scenario where the Jets got off to a great start this season. I could have seen a scenario where Zach Wilson played poorly enough to get benched. I'm not sure I saw a scenario where both of those things would happen, because you would have thought
Right.
if the Jets were off to a great start this year, it would have been because of Zach Wilson. Even in the games that the Jets were winning early in the season, it was more the defense than it was Zach Wilson. It was more the running game than it was Zach Wilson. And then after their bye, the Jets lost this horrible game in New England. They lost 10-3 on a punt return in the last half minute of the game. And that led to Zach Wilson's benching. And Mike White came in for the Jets, played really well against the Chicago Bears 3 weeks ago, played okay the next 2 weeks against Minnesota and Buffalo, tough losses on the road. But in that Buffalo game, he suffered an injury, and then Zach Wilson came right back in. And last week against Detroit, Zach Wilson, he hit some very difficult passes, but he missed a lot of easy passes. It was a really interesting game from that standpoint. But the Jets need Zach Wilson to perform, because their season's on the line. And Tony, I feel like these are teams that are going in two opposite directions, where the Jaguars are entering this game very hot and the Jets are kind of in free fall at the moment.
Well, and they're at that spot that you just mentioned because of the same position, but for two different reasons. One is because most people believe that the Jets team is built solidly around Zach Wilson. And most people believe that Trevor Lawrence is actually doing everything that he's doing without the team being completely built. So it just goes back to me, excuse my voice is cracking a little bit. It goes back to me thinking about the evaluation process with these two quarterbacks. So much was made of the fact that Zach Wilson played well off schedule with these wild Patrick Mahomes type throws. And so much was made of the fact that Trevor Lawrence was this prospect, Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning, perfect prospect. Well, now I think the Jets actually need Zach Wilson to not play off schedule and to play on schedule. And Trevor Lawrence actually plays off schedule when the time permits him to play off schedule. But he's playing on schedule because with a team that may not have everything that you want at the skill positions and at the offensive line as of yet, that's where you need to actually keep a ship really, really tight. And that quarterback needs to elevate everybody around him by being sound. And I think it's because if there's an advantage, I believe it's because Doug Peterson is a Super Bowl winning quarterback who has a history of knowing how to play with quarterbacks and develop quarterbacks. Whereas the Jets are led by a guy who's a defensive coach whose defense is lights out and plays really, really well. So I think that's the tale of the two things. I had some of my Twitter followers research something for me. I said, I need somebody to go back and find all of those tweets that a lot of the New York media guys were saying that they got the best quarterback of the two. Because right now, I'm telling you, if the season were to end today and we go through the offseason and start the season back up, most folks would say that Trevor Lawrence is somewhere between number 5 and number 7 in terms of the NFL. And I think that's a hell of a stride for a guy in his second season.
Absolutely. And you can go back 2 years. These were the teams that were battling for Trevor Lawrence. And the game the Jets won that took them out of the number 1 overall draft position was the game where they defeated the Los Angeles Rams on the road. And it was a very infamous moment, and I guess somewhat infamous moment in Jets history, where Braden Mann, the punter, made a game-saving tackle on a punt return. Now, this is a little bit of revisionist history because next week the Jets beat the Cleveland Browns. And it was
right.
The reason they beat the Browns is because the Browns had a COVID outbreak in their wide receiver room. So the Browns had pretty much none of their receivers. But, Tony, I want to go back to something you said because I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. In fact, I love it when people say stuff that I say on Locked On Jets because you made a point that I make a lot about Zach Wilson. So thank you for saying it. You make me look smart in front of my listeners. But I always say that Zach Wilson needs to play on schedule. That's what this offense creates, open receivers. And Zach Wilson missed a lot of those throws last week where, guys were getting open. And if you look at Zach Wilson and Mike White side to side, if you ask who the more physically talented player is, there's not much question. Zach Wilson's way more mobile. He's got a much bigger arm. But who's executing the Jets offense at a higher level? It's been Mike White because Mike White knows where the ball's supposed to go, and he gets it there. And sometimes Zach Wilson tries to do a little bit too much. I think that was more the case last year than this year. This year, I just think he is a little bit panicky in the pocket, and he abandons pockets before he should. He did not do that a whole lot last week against Detroit, but his movements were not that great in the pocket, and he slid into a couple of sacks, and it just feels like he's not completely comfortable in this offense in a way that maybe Mike White is, even if Mike White isn't as physically gifted as Zach Wilson. So I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head, and you're right. I think Trevor Lawrence. And listen, I think Trevor Lawrence has all the tools in the world. I think if you want big plays, you're going to eventually get them out of Trevor Lawrence.
Right. I think one of the most telling signs was, and I cracked a joke about this a couple of days ago on my podcast. I said the Jets had players who actually had a T-shirt with Mike White's face on it, and said something like, "In White we trust," or "In Mike we." And I said, normally where I'm from, when you see a guy on a T-shirt, he's dead, right? And people are like trying to remember him. But not only is Mike White not dead, Zach Wilson ain't dead either, and he's sitting right there watching these dudes celebrate this guy on a shirt. That has to feel funny, man. You talk about your football self-esteem getting ripped out. To me, that's like, I'm like, oh, I saw it on TV. I said, do they have on Mike White shirts? And Zach Wilson is right there? And I'm thinking, like, that's not a good look. Am I wrong? Did they or did they not do that?
It was before, I believe it was before the Minnesota game. They had Mike White. Tony, I got to tell you, I think Mike White won the locker room over. I think that if you ask those, I think Mike White's currently the starting quarterback on the team because Robert Saleh at his injury update pretty much said White hasn't been cleared, and that implied that if Mike White was healthy, he would be in the lineup this week. So for the time being, I'm not saying it's going to be this way forever, but for the time being, Mike White is the number 1 quarterback on the depth chart.
Well, somebody told me, I can't remember. I'm going to give Jeff Lagerman, former Jet, who is also a former Jaguar, who's on our radio broadcast here. I think I'm going to give him credit for it. When the Jaguars had the Gardner Minshew and somebody else, and they were trying to figure out who they're going to play at quarterback. I think Lagerman said something on the radio to the effect of, any good team, the players tell the coach who the quarterback is. And, so you would think as a novice, you go, what do you mean? They form a council and somebody walks up to the coach and goes, no, he should be the starter. He said, no. He said, watch them. See who they follow. Look at their body language. If you pay attention to the locker room, the people in the locker room, you'll see their leader. And when it's not the guy that you've designated to be, that's bad. It's extra bad. And it's something that it's not good for them. We're going to talk about some key matchups here in the second segment of the crossover with Locked On Jets and Locked On Jaguars. I got to let you know that PrizePicks is our sponsor today. This is the PrizePicks crossover show. So make sure that you understand the fact that today's show is presented by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. Today's show is also sponsored by and brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. That's why you'll be able to find an episode from The League available as a bonus episode on Locked On NFL. Narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary smack talker Richard Sherman and sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks, The League is an 8-part docuseries about the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to America's favorite sport, pro football. You don't want to miss this or these untold stories spanning from the 1940s through present. Our bonus episode is called The We of the Cowboy, and it is the incredible story of how the 1977 Dallas Cowboys brought in Bruce Lee's protege to teach their defense martial art. This is unreal. Ushering in a new approach to the way the league trained. Each story offers equal parts history, entertainment, and social commentary. Head over to Locked On NFL for a bonus episode of The League or catch the full series wherever you get your podcast, available now. Audible, get in the game. And you can get in the game here on Locked On Jets and Locked On Jaguars, crossover style, here on a Thursday with John Butchko and Tony Wiggins, making us your first listen, and we thank you for doing that. Your second listen should be the Locked On Today sports show with Peter Bukowski as the host, power-packed, the best show you ever want because it takes all the biggest stories from around the world of sports, take the local experts, and they put it all together. That's Locked On Sports Today with Peter Bukowski. Wherever you get your podcast, make sure you like and subscribe. What you got, John?
Well, Tony, you look at the matchups in this game. I'll give you a guy I did not think was going to play, but now it looks like he's going to be in the lineup. It's Quinnen Williams, who's having an all-pro type season, making the leap in his 4th year. He'd always been a good player his first 3 years. He's become a star this year. He suffered a calf injury in Buffalo a few weeks ago, and he did not play against the Detroit Lions. And once that happened, I said, there's no way he's going to be back for Jacksonville because it's a short week. And then as we learned, the weather report was not very favorable. It seems like every day the weather projection for the game becomes worse and worse. So I said, well, they're not going to put him on the bad field. But he was back at practice, full participant on Wednesday. So it seems like Quinnen Williams is going to be back in the lineup. And, you look at this Jacksonville team, they've got Etienne. Of course, they have Trevor Lawrence. Quinnen Williams is going to have to be a disruptive presence for the New York Jets in this game. Now, typically he lines up over the left guard. So I believe that's Tyler Shatley. So that's the guy I got my eye on for the Jets on defense. And, I don't think it takes any degree of expert analysis. I don't think that was really that insightful to tell you Quinnen Williams is the best player on the team. That's a key matchup for the Jets, but Jets have to get pressure to Trevor Lawrence. They have to control the point of attack against the Jacksonville run game. So that's my key matchup on defense. And on offense, I'm going to stick on the trenches, but I'm just going to say the Jets offensive line versus the Jaguars defensive line, but especially in the run game, because when the Jets have had success uh, with Zach Wilson under center, it's been based on the run game. They've done everything in their power to make life easy for Zach Wilson. Last week, the Jets went up against the Detroit Lions defense that had been playing better, but still was just not that good of a run defense. And they got nothing. And it was really because they lost the point at the point of attack up front. The Jets have a very talented rookie in Bam Knight, an undrafted free agent who they signed out of North Carolina State, who was coming off 3 outstanding games. The Jets had really struggled to get the run game going since Breece Hall got hurt in Denver back in October. Hall was on his way to, and ever since he had gone down, the Jets tried to trade for James Robinson, as I'm sure you and your listeners are aware. It really hasn't panned out. Michael Carter's been consistent, and Bam Knight stepped into the lineup. He played great, but he really did not have a chance against the Detroit Lions last week. And again, I think with Zach Wilson under center, maybe some bad weather impacting things, Jets are going to need to rely on their run game. If they don't run block better, then it's not going to happen for them. Now, let me flip the question to you. Do you see as the key matchups?
Well, I'm gonna piggyback a little bit off of you. You got to stop Quentin Williams, and it's for 2 reasons. When the Jaguars are on offense, one, that left guard spot is the weakest link of the offensive line, and it's doubled up now because Cam Robinson, the left tackle, is out for the season with a torn meniscus, and Walker Little, who's in his second year, is at left tackle. So now that entire left side is a little bit of a problem. And I'm a little bit concerned about the twist game. If the Jets do any of that stuff, I don't know if they do any twisting and stunning, but if they do, that's a problem. I'm also mentioning Quincy Williams because he is a lightning bolt who runs all around, and he was picked by the Jaguars and subsequently let go when they decided to change their defense to a 3-4 from a 4-3. And he's played well since he's been up there. And I'm thinking that he might have a little revenge on his mind and have, number one, Travis Etienne set in his sights. Also, when the Jaguars are on offense, whoever Sauce Gardner's playing against, Trevor's going to throw the ball where he wants to throw it. He ain't going to be scared of any corner. Wherever he wants to throw the ball, that's where he's going to throw it. And I'm worried a little bit that in that weather with Sauce's length, if Trevor – if he doesn't realize that he hasn't really played against a guy built like that all year, and all it takes is 1 or 2 mistakes. When the Jaguars are on defense, the name for me is Garrett Wilson. I think he's the game breaker. He's the guy who could turn a hitch into a touchdown. I think he tracks the ball really, really well downfield, and the Jaguars have actually had trouble at one of their cornerback spots. This game might come down to a penalty, a sack, a long down and distance, which we can talk about can be affected by the left side of the line not being a strength when the strength of the defensive line for the Jets is their right side, which coincides with the left. Talk about Sauce Gardner getting a pick in inclement weather. We could also mention the fact that Garrett Wilson can make big plays. And while I think the Jaguars, top to bottom, especially because their coach and their quarterback are probably a lot better than the coach and the quarterback there, that can be negated if you make mistakes. And mistakes can be in the form of penalties that create long down and distance in bad weather, turnovers, especially the ones late in the game because you have less time to overcome them, and then giving up big plays on busted coverages or somebody tracking the ball downfield. And I think those 3 things make Jacksonville, who's probably better at this juncture, I think it makes them vulnerable to make sure that they don't go up there on a Thursday night on a short week and make too many mistakes.
All right, well, you have heard about the key storylines for these teams. You've heard about the key matchups. Ahead here on this crossover episode of Locked On Jets and Locked On Jaguars, Tony and I are going to make our picks. We'll tell you who we think is going to win this huge Thursday night game between the New York Jets and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, the betting line has been up in the air all week. It's kind of moved between the Jets and the Jaguars. At the time where we're recording, the Jets are 1.5-point favorites. So it tells you that this game's virtually a toss-up. Well, if you want to lay some money down, you should know that BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get all the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. That's from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, well, of course you love sports podcasts. You're listening to Locked On Jets and Locked On Jaguars. You can find those at BetOnline as well. They are the fastest and easiest way to get all your betting info. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even in states where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. If you think law enforcement officers cannot tell whether you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell, your coworkers can tell, even your parents can tell. Everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you are not. Because the bottom line is that if you feel different, you drive different. And driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI. Paid for by NHTSA. It's crossover Thursday here on Locked On Podcast Network. But unlike most weeks, we don't have to wait a couple days after crossover Thursday for a game because we get the game tonight. It's the Jets and the Jaguars on Amazon Thursday Night Football. First game the Jaguars have played on Amazon. Certainly the first game the Jets have played on Amazon under the new Thursday Night Football TV deal. Tony, who's going to win?
I think the Jaguars are going to pull it off. I think they're going to continue their hot streak. I think Doug Peterson, as a play caller, as somebody who can actually have that little bit of leverage where it's almost like, you remember a little boxing game when you were little and you had the little stick men and you had control over him. I think because Doug is an offensive play caller, he'll have more control over the game than the Jets will. And he'll also be controlling someone that's a little bit more steady, a little bit more confident right now, and he's leading the team. As opposed to the Jets having a dude out there that he has to see his teammates wear T-shirts with another dude's picture on it. So I'm going to go with the Jaguars winning a closely contested game, 20-16, and getting closer and closer to securing the AFC South.
You know, Tony, I've gone back and forth. I don't have a lot of faith in this Jets team right now. I can't believe we're going to do this, but I am going to pick the Jets. And when we started this show, when we began recording, I was fully intending to pick the Jaguars. But when we went through those matchups, it kind of like sold me on the idea maybe the Jets have some advantages here. Another thing that I think may benefit the Jets is when you're talking about a game on a short week, you don't have a lot of time to game plan. You pretty much just have to roll your team out as is. The Jets, as much as any defense in the league, I think they pretty much do what they do. They don't really adjust that much for an opponent. So I think from that standpoint, maybe it's a little bit easier for the Jets to play on Thursday night than it is for a lot of other teams because you don't see a lot of variation from week to week. I think being at home always helps a little bit because as little time as you get to prepare, you get even less time when you're going on the road for one of these games. The weather is a great unknown. It's difficult to say what's going to happen with the weather. And that could be a great equalizer. You know, Jets have played a lot of bad weather games recently. They played that game in New England I was telling you about. The wind impacted Zach Wilson's ability to throw in that game. It impacted the kicking game. And I think in some ways it probably led to the punt return New England had for a touchdown. A few weeks later, the Jets had a game at home against the Chicago Bears. It was a huge rainstorm right after Thanksgiving. And then just 2 weeks ago, they were in Buffalo, another very windy day. The wind really affected Josh Allen, who's got a rocket arm, and Mike White. So the Jets are no stranger to playing in bad weather. You know, whether it helps them or not. You know, they've won one, lost two, but it could be an equalizer. It could lead to something weird. It could lead to a fumble here or there. So there are a lot of unknowns going into this game. I'm going to go Jets 20, Jaguars 17. It is not a pick with a ton of conviction, though, Tony. I think the real drama is going to be for me because I am traveling for the holidays tomorrow. So I think maybe we have to do a prediction on whether my flight's going to get out on time. The good thing is I'm flying out in the morning, so I feel like I got a shot. But that's going to be just as much drama as Jets Jaguars.
No doubt. Well, happy travels to you. Great prediction, by the way, because it's only 1 point difference in that prediction. The one thing about the weather, though, is both teams are playing in it. It's not like if one team gets the ball, it's going to be raining, and then all of a sudden when they punt and kick off, all of a sudden the sun comes out. So neither team can use it as an excuse because it's all relative. You just got to play football, man, and what better way to play football in December than to have a little bit of foolishness going on with the weather. We thank you for joining us on another crossover edition here with the Locked On NFL Network, but Locked On Jaguars, Locked On Jets. Make sure you check John out at Locked On Jets. John Butchko, he does a very, very good job. And, of course, I ain't too bad myself on Locked On Jaguars. Check me out, too. Like and subscribe both YouTube pages. You guys travel safe and make sure you stay safe for the holidays, and we'll see you next time.